So in Cook and Williams, we're looking at the cash flows. So let's get into it. Okay. So the most companies fold because of their cash flows, and cash flow is simply the movement of money in a firm. There must be cash flow in a building trade. It is the very lifeblood of the enterprise. If you imagine a construction site and a project, you know what your income and your expenditure would be more or less, but the cash flow is actually the means of doing that. Remember, during the workshop and during the lectures, I spoke extensively about your capital outlay and your deficit of actually only getting your payment after the second month after you've already started with your work. So you have to carry the project for a while. So it's important for you guys to grasp the idea of that I need to take out a loan or have credit to carry the project while I'm waiting for my income. Okay, bank loans or funds invested in a company by the shareholders, okay, or bank loan. The client can also run into a financial difficulty, and that's something that one should also consider. So it's always worthwhile to make sure that the contract that you've been appointed for, that the client actually has the necessary funds available to pay you in the end, and pay you timeously. That's the main thing. Sometimes the client doesn't have money, and then they only pay you after 90 or 120 days, which will have an extra effect on your cash flow. Okay, so then the next thing is client provides the capital. It's borrowed or it's through shareholders. His position is always negative until he gets income. Okay, and then the contractor relies on interim or stage payments and has to pay wages, material, subcontractors, etc. Thus, also he has to rely on credit, client and contractor cash flow. Okay, so let's have a look at the client's cash flow. I'm not going to go into this too much. You can see, go through these tables on your own accord. Please do so, because I will expect you guys to actually be able to discuss this in a question or so. You will see this is a small house development. The example of this is on page 100 or 302, and here you can see you've got your land cost, then you've got your preparation of legal fees and so on, then you've got your design costs and so on. Then you actually appoint the contractor, so you have a constant outflow up to that point where you can actually sell that house, and then your deficit goes down, and then you just have your construction cost again, and it goes down again, and so it goes on. Okay, so in this range here is where the client actually gets his income. Just the other way around, the 4-month office block development, you can see the developer's profit is basically here. The movement of money out is continually going up, and until he gets to a point where he can actually start either to sell it, which is here, or he starts renting it, where it starts going down like this on the other side. Okay, fairly straightforward graphs, which I think you guys do comprehend. Okay, then we get to our let me just scroll down to see what the heading is. Then the cash flow forecasting. One of the most important functions for the construction manager is to actually be able to do a cash flow forecast. That's why I say this chapter 14 is crucial, and it's a very important chapter. You have to understand overtrading should be avoided at all costs. Income from the portfolio of contracts should be considered. It is usually calculated contract by contract. That's important to note. It's not something that you can calculate for a portfolio, but it's usually done from contract to contract. The minimum and maximum perimeters are calculated, and then you have to apply the think about this as a roller coaster ride. You will see, as you saw previously, the graphs that I showed. It is an up and down roller coaster. And then retention should always be taken into account. Your retention in government projects are usually 365 days, so there's a 10% that's usually retained, and you only get that 10% after a year. So most of the contractors try and price their P's and G's in such a way that that 10% is actually the profit that they get after a year or year's retention. You should also consider having a retention on your subcontractors as well, to lessen the load on your cash flow. Okay, then a 6-month cash flow forecast. This is on page 304, and this is now forecasting the contract. We've got this example of, we've got 3 contracts, contract A, B, C, and D. January we've got a inflow of 100,000 and then 50,000. February the same, March the same. We've got 50,000, 60,000, and 50,000. In April we've got a 100,000, 100, and so forth. Okay, so this is just broken up into that, and then this is now that same townhouse development but for the contractor. And then you've got your salaries in month 1, it's like that. You've got material and your subcontractors. In month 2, you've got 2 projects going, so you've got your salaries for your staff, your telephone, and you've got materials, which went up, and then your subcontractors which had a higher cost. And you can see where your expenditure actually goes up quite a lot. So you've got a constant expenditure on this side and a relative constant one on this side, second one, and then you've got your fluctuating items on these on this side here. Okay, so just putting that on a graph, so you've got your cash flow forecast. Here's your break-even point. So all that you do is your inflow minus your outflow to determine what your actual income would be. So in this case, month 1, the inflow was actually more than the outflow, so we start with a 40,000 surplus, and then we've got our second month, your inflow is 150,000, and then your outflow is now 160,000. The difference is 10,000, so it goes down with that 10,000. So this is a cumulative graph, and very easy, you can see 28,000. This is what your cash flow is. So you can see after month 3, it's still you losing 50,000 rand with regard to your income. So there you see you actually going into a negative cash flow. From here on, you need to have credit to actually finance your project. Okay, same again here, and you can see it's actually picking up here in June, and July might be a better month where you actually start picking up your or going through the break-even point again, where you're actually getting a positive cash flow. Okay, very simple exercise that you guys can use. Okay, forecasting contract value. You've got determine the potential income. The following questions should be asked when you're looking at your forecasting. What is the basis of the forecast? What's the basic info you need? How does timing affect the monetary requirements? How accurate does forecasting have to be? That's a very crucial thing. My answer is usually as accurate as possible. If you over conservative, then usually your profit is downsized. If you over lenient, then you might run into trouble and not have enough cash flow. Okay, so how is the cash flow required monitored and convincing the lenders to actually borrow you the money? Okay, the various types of methods of forecasting is the S-curve, the cumulative percentage, using the bar chart program, the good guess method, and we usually use the bar chart program because that's the most accurate and most scientific way of actually doing it. But sometimes you don't have the time to do that, so then you will sometimes use the S-curve, and the S-curve is very easy. You've got a 3/4 or a quarter and 3/4 rule. Okay, so in your first quarter of your project, being this, if this is the period, so in your first quarter you will spend a or in your first third of your project you will spend a quarter of your resources. Your cash flow will be a quarter. In your second third of your project, you will spend half of your project value, and then in your last third you will have the last quarter of your project cost flowing out. Okay. Then your S-curve representation, present value is 160,000. Okay, so they just made an example here of how it will actually look, and you can see that this principle is more or less the same. So this is a very quick way of getting to a cash flow projection. Okay, usually when you check cash flows given to you by contractors, this is also a very good way of just checking whether their cash flows are actually within the ballpark. Okay, then looking at the cumulative value forecast. Cumulative value forecast is based on percentages. This is also a very handy way and quick way of actually doing cash flow forecasts, and you can see projections of how a project will pan out. On a 6-month project, you estimate that you will spend 9% within the first month, 24%, so it is 15% on top of the 9, so this is cumulative, and then you go to 45%, then 67, and then 85 up to 100. So very easy. Then you just plot your expenditure on your graph, and you draw in your graph to get to your percentage spent, and you can see they actually put in the S-curve, and the S-curve is more or less in there, but you can see there is quite a bit of a difference. You can see more or less here in the middle is where you will have a big variance with regard to that. So you can see that you will have a lower cash flow or expenditure on a project as the S-curve would suggest. Okay, then you get to your bar chart cumulative forecast, and this is something that you guys will have to be able to do. So you should be able to actually go and plot this. It's very easy. You've got your program here on the left, and then you've got your time in weeks or months or whatever expenditure or weight that you do allocate to it. And very simply, you just allocate your expenditure. In your first month, you would do or spend or do about 5,000 rands worth of work. Your piling is 10,000. The budget, your pile caps is this, drainage is this. This is now according to your quoted price or your BOQ. So you can very easily get to a point where you plot your budget, and then you can see what your expenditure would be on that budget over the course of the project. So your site establishment will be a week, so in that week your expenditure will be 5. Pardon. And then your piling is also 10,000, and you have a week for that. Caps on your piling will run over 3 weeks, so it's 21 divided by the 3. Your drainage will start early, and it will also run over 3 weeks, and so forth. You can see they made it very simple. They just divided it with the amount of time that you actually spent on it. You can actually go into more detail and divide it more evenly. If you're using a program like CCS or Microsoft Projects, you can actually do it very accurately, where in the first week you will have more expenditure than say in the second week. You will have more resources allocated within the first week than in the second week. Okay, fairly straightforward. So, and then once you've done that bar chart or histogram, you can simply just add all your costs. So in this instance, you've got your preliminaries, which is divided over the 20-week period. So you've got your 5,000 plus your 0.5 to get a 5.5, and your cumulative value just underneath that. Okay guys, sorry for that. I just quickly had to take that call. So we're basically done with this slide. So once you've added everything up, you can easily get a graph from this, which you just plot like that. And so your cumulative outflow over your 20-week period is as follows. They grouped it after month 1. It's 37,000, 73,000, 107, and then 136, and then 164. So your cumulative value forecast. Remember, I've been talking now about your cash flow and outflow and so on, but this is actually applicable to your cumulative cost of the project. Okay, you'll explain or understand that a little bit later. Okay, so you've got your value that I've spoken about now. So we've did the value forecast, but now we're getting to a point where your actual cash flow inflow is only received after the first month. So you will see that, like I've explained in the lectures, it's after here you're appointed, you do your site establishment and ground earthworks and so on. So you already do work in your first month. Your second month, then you put in your first claim. Okay, so for the amount of work that you've done here, you put in your claim. Okay, and then you do continue with your work, so your cash flow continues to be an outflow, and then only after the second month you get your first payment. Okay, and then you put in your second claim, and that claim you only received in month 3. Okay, and so forth. So you can see it's also on the previous month's work that you've done. So there's a continuous deficit that you have as you go along. Okay, then monetary income. This is just a bar graph of the above. Please have a look on for figure 14.10, which you will find on page 320. Okay, the final payment is released at the end of the defects liability period. Okay, so you remember, this is now, the project is practically complete here. Then you put in your last invoice, practical invoice, and then you get your payment there, and then you have to wait until the defects liability period is complete, which is a year or 3 months depending on your contract. So you only get it after a while on this side. Okay, the movement of money, and the first 2 months the contractor may not get an income. The contractor will be paying money for wages, materials, subcontractors. Okay, so this is just a theory of what I've just explained. Some income is generated with income. Figure 14.12 only you only break even after 6 months. Okay, in the example that that they've got on on page 318, we'll get into that now. You will see that you only break even after 6 months in the project, where your project actually gets into positive cash flow. Thus, the contractor is financing the project, and then, however, the contractor will use the credit facility offered by suppliers to lessen the impact of this deficit. In general, subcontractors you pay within 2 to 3 weeks, and suppliers will be paid according to their terms, 30 days after delivery or so. And it really depends on how it works. In South Africa, it's very much a system of get paid when you are paid, which the new contracts are trying to alleviate, so that because some of the subcontractors did suffer quite a lot through this process. Okay. The credit system works well if all the links in the chain holds. You can think about if one person doesn't pay, that's where the whole derailment of paying your subcontractors only when you get paid impacts them quite a lot, especially with clients who can't pay, and then you can't pay your subcontractors, and the subcontractors can't pay their suppliers, and there's a whole spin-off of that. Okay, here's that graph that we spoke of. So you can see you have your expenditure in the first month, you put in your claim, then you put in or doing more work, and you have more cash flow going out, and then you get your first payment, so your cash flow deficit is relieved slightly, but you still have cash flow outflow, and then you've got only get your inflow here. So you can see how the trend goes, and it's only after month 6 that you start getting a positive cash flow again, although it dips after that month into deficit again. Okay, so this is on a no payment delay situation. But if you can negotiate with your suppliers and your subcontractors that you pay them only later on, you can see how this trend of cash outflow is actually alleviated, so that it doesn't go down as sharply as it went down here in normal circumstances. So you can see after the first month you're actually getting a bit of a positive cash flow, and then you dip back into that, and you can see overall your cash flow deficit is much less. So the amount of money that you have to borrow to finance this project is actually lessened, whereas you would have had to borrow that amount of money now at one stage. Now you only have to have this amount as stated. Okay, and then the main thing about getting stuff alleviated is to prevent as much interest as possible, because interest eats into your actual profit. Okay. Working capital. Okay, so working capital is the amount needed to keep the ship sailing. Okay, that is now that deficit that I spoke about earlier. So your minimum cash flow on normal circumstances is like this, and then your maximum cash flow is actually calculated like that. Okay, and then if you have your payment delay situation, your optimal trend actually looks much better with your secondary graph, or your capital requirement, contractors working capital requirements, is much lessened. So your minimum cash flow is relieved, and your maximum cash flow calculations is much better than it would be in a normal contract. Okay, so this is your worst case scenario sorry, here at the bottom, and your best case scenario here at the top. Okay, and that's just the buffer that you usually build in. So this is the maximum amount of working capital that you need to plan for. Okay guys, this is that slide that had that slight mistake during the workshop where it showed 1.2 here. So this slide is now correct. So basically a very simple thing that you can see what interest does to your profits is your contractor turnover is on a project, for instance, is 20 million. Your profits on a project like that is 600,000 and you had to borrow about 3 million. Okay, so your estimated profits is 600,000. So you borrowed 3 million. Just a scenario, for instance, if it's a very good lending rate, you've got prime, which is 5% plus 2%, which gives you a interest of 7%. 7% on 3 million of the amount that you have to borrow is 210,000, which is actually subtracted from your 600,000. So you lose 1% of the 3% profit that you actually wanted to calculate. Now if you do that calculation, 1 divided by 3, it's almost a third of your profit that you lose by just having the paying interest on that 3 million. Let's have a look at what the current rate is in South Africa. Is 10.25 is the lending rate, which amounts to 307,500 rand, which then leaves you with only 292,000 rand of profit, or 3% minus that 1.5. So it's another 0.5% that you add to your add to your amount that's actually subtracted from your profit. So just to illustrate that to you, if it's not 1.5, it's 50% compared to 33% of your profit that you actually got in the end. So it's half of your profit that was eaten away by interest. So and that's just something to take note of, how easily the lending rates can influence your cash flow on a project, so, or your profit. So please be aware of that. Okay. So the things to improve your cash flow: at tender stage, load money in under measured items, load your money into early items such as excavations, subcontractors, load money into mobilization items in the P's and G's. During the contract, submit interim application on time, over measurement of the work, overvalue material on site, agree on the value of variations as soon as possible, keep good records and submit claims early, deal with defective work quickly and avoid delayed payments, make maximum use of trade credit facilities. Okay, so the main thing is to be efficient on site. If you've got a 3-month contract, you have to be finished by within the 3 months. Post-contract is submit all the documentation as soon as possible, ensure timely release of retentions by submitting health and safety file, etc. Agree on final account as soon as possible and collect outstanding retentions on time. Okay, so we've dealt with a couple of these in the previous chapter, but please make sure this is a very important slide for me. You will have to be able to discuss this. Okay, then forecast value and cash flow examples. Okay, on page 322, you will see an example. A contractor has won a project that will run in 3 phases with an overall period of 24 months. Produce a cumulative value forecast for the complete project and an assessment of the contractor's capital for the first 6 months. Okay, the above values include 5% contribution to profit and overheads, and then you've got 5 retention. Then you've got a cost. Costs are payable at the end of the applicable month. No delay in payment. Okay, please take note of that. And they made it quite a optimistic one, so there's no delay in payment. Interim payments are to be made monthly, 1 month after the valuation. So you've got 30 days after you submit your claim that you're being paid. Okay. So here's the scenario. So you've got a 2-story extension, refurbished canteen, and office refurbishment. So you've got your projects divided into 3 phases. You've got your operations sections. You've got your substructure, superstructure, finishing, demolitions, superstructure, finishing, demolition, superstructure, finishing. So very straightforward, very simplified example. Okay, putting that onto a graph. So we've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then we've got substructure, superstructure, finishes, all in this one. So you can see that we've got our expenditure for phase 1 for month 1. We foresee for our substructure we have expenditure of 75, and then 75 for the next month. Our superstructure is divided into 6 equal parts, 100,000, 100,000, 100,000, and so forth. So it goes through the motions the same way as the previous example, and then you actually just plot that and you add that together to get to a point, or your prelims is here at the bottom. Here's the prelims added to your actual expenditure. So your prelims is in your first month you will have a double expenditure, and then during the rest of the months it's divided equally to get to our budget of 250,000. Okay, so then we've got our monthly value. So this is just our monthly value added together, and then we've got our cumulative value here at the bottom. You can see how it actually accumulates up to a point where it's actually the total project value of 4 million rand here at the bottom. Okay, so easy on Excel, you can just plot your cumulative value forecast. So remember, this is your value forecast. So this is the according to the BOQ. Okay, very simple graph. So this is your S curve that we've created. So now forecast value of cash flow example. Step 2 of the example is to establish the cumulative cost for this project. So you've got a cost is your value that you've done of work times 100 plus 100, or divided by 100 plus your margin. So for instance, if you've done 390,000 rands worth of work, your actual cost to that for that item to be able to have done that work is 370,000. So this is your cost on the project. Okay, very simple. So it's basically your expenditure. You're making 5% profit on the amount that actually is done for that month. Okay, so I hope everyone understands that. So it's your value of work times or subtract basically your 5% from that to get 75, which is the same as basically 100 over 105. Okay. Step 3, then calculate the contractor's actual income, allowing for 1 month payment delay and 5% retention. Okay, so forecast value. So after month 1, the cumulative value was 95,000 rand, and then we list 5% on that. So this is our actual amount that we could claim. Okay, per month. Okay, so this is now for your income that we're calculating now. So we've got 90,000 is our actual income, which you put in after month or at the end of month. Let me just get my bearings, that you put in after the first month, and then you only receive your payment after the second month. Okay, so this is your cash flow inflow, and this is that 90,000 that's projected there. Okay. Okay, so that's more or less how it works. So step 4, plot is sawtooth diagram for the first 6 months on the project using the cumulative cost and payment figures calculated above. Money out is plotted downwards at an angle, and money in payment is plotted upwards. Okay, I didn't do that. I don't know how to do that on Excel, to be honest, but it's easy to do it by hand. But for our purposes, it's not that important. The biggest thing that you can get from that is usually what type of amount of capital you need for your project. So you can see that graph is on page 325, and it had graph 14.16. Okay, so here we go. So you can see after the first month, this is your cash flow deficit, and it still goes down, and then you can actually calculate what your value escalation is, and you can see after the month 6 you will have your biggest deficit. Cash flow funding profile to month 6 project is in a cash flow deficit position for the whole of the period. So we're still not picking up our heads and getting close to the break-even point. Okay, so I think that's fairly straightforward. Step 5, and this is what you guys will have to be able to do for me, is display the maximum and minimum working capital required in the form of a table. So you have month 1, your cash outflow. Yeah, I just did the calculation, so there's a couple of zeros that has to be added here. Is after month 2 is 260, 81,000. Then you saw what we had there is the 353,000. So on Excel, it's very easy just to pull that formula through to actually get that deficit. So this is a very typical question that I might ask, where you have to calculate what your capital outlay will be, or your maximum working capital that you will need to finance this project will be within the first 6 months, for instance. Okay, and that's more or less it. I'll put on a little example for you guys on this, so please note and watch Blackboard to see a requirement for a little assignment that I want you guys to do for me on this. Thank you.